Aldrics Lasting Love. Arlington, 1921. Victoria Ellis uncovered a faded tapestry in a forgotten storeroom, its intricate threads weaving the name Corporal Henry Brooks into a story of love and loss. Chapter 1. The Unveiling of Secrets. The air in the attic storeroom hung thick with the scent of dust and forgotten memories. Victoria Ellis, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, coughed softly, waving a gloved hand in front of her face. Sunlight, fractured and weak, filtered through a single, grime-streaked window, illuminating swirling motes of dust that danced in the stillness. Arlington in 1921 was a world slowly healing, mending the deep gashes left by the Great War, but some wounds, Victoria knew, lingered far longer than others. She was here, in the cavernous attic of her late aunt's estate, searching for something, anything, to connect her to the woman who had raised her, a woman who had remained an enigma even in death. Aunt Beatrice had been a collector, a hoarder of moments and memories, most of which had been carefully catalogued and displayed. But this was different. It felt abandoned, even before her death. Crates overflowed with chipped china, moth-eaten tapestries, and stacks of yellowed newspapers proclaiming victories and losses from a war that had ended 3 years prior, yet still felt chillingly present. Victoria ran a finger along the spine of a leather-bound book, its title long faded. She'd spent the morning sifting through mundane items, finding little of interest, a familiar ache of disappointment settling in her chest. Her aunt had been a nurse during the war, stationed in France, a period of her life she rarely spoke about. Victoria had always hoped to find a diary, a letter, something that would offer a glimpse into that hidden part of her aunt's past. She moved deeper into the room, her sensible shoes clicking softly on the wooden floorboards. A large, rolled-up bundle lay tucked in a corner, almost hidden behind a stack of precariously balanced paintings. Curiosity piqued, Victoria carefully maneuvered the paintings aside, her heart beating a little faster. She knelt, her joints protesting slightly, and began to unroll the bundle. It was a tapestry, heavy and coarse beneath her fingers. Dust billowed up as she unfurled it, revealing faded colors and intricate needlework. The scene depicted a pastoral landscape, a rolling green field dotted with wildflowers, a small village nestled in the distance. But it was the details, the almost hidden elements, that caught Victoria's attention. Woven into the branches of a sprawling oak tree, almost invisible unless one looked closely, were the faint, ghostly figures of soldiers, their uniforms barely discernible, their faces blurred. And then, nestled amongst the roots of the tree, stitched in a thread that was almost silver, she saw it a name. Corporal Henry Brooks. The name resonated, a faint echo in the silence of the room. Victoria had never heard it before, yet it felt familiar, charged with an unspoken significance. She traced the letters with her fingertip, feeling the slight roughness of the thread. Who was Corporal Henry Brooks? And what was his connection to this tapestry, to her aunt? A sudden wave of dizziness washed over Victoria, and she sat back on her heels, breathing deeply. The air felt suddenly heavy, oppressive. She looked around the room, the shadows seeming to deepen, the silence pressing in on her. It was as if the tapestry had awakened something, stirred up a past that had been deliberately buried. She carefully re-rolled the tapestry, a sense of urgency gripping her. She needed to know more, needed to unravel the story woven into these faded threads. As she carried the heavy bundle out of the storeroom, leaving the dust and shadows behind, Victoria felt a shift within her, a stirring of a long-dormant curiosity. The quiet, predictable life she had known, a life devoted to tending her garden and managing her aunt's estate, suddenly felt incomplete. The tapestry was more than just a piece of forgotten needlework. It was a key, a portal to a past she was determined to explore, a past that held the secrets of a man named Corporal Henry Brooks, and perhaps the secrets of her aunt's hidden heart. The weight of the tapestry in her arms was a new, unexpected, and thrilling. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Somme. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished mahogany table in Victoria's library as she spread the tapestry out, its faded colors seeming to shimmer in the soft light. The scent of beeswax and old paper mingled with the faint, earthy aroma emanating from the tapestry itself. She had spent the hours since leaving the attic in a state of quiet contemplation, the name Corporal Henry Brooks repeating in her mind like a whispered prayer. She had examined the tapestry more closely, noticing details she had missed in the dim light of the storeroom. The wildflowers depicted were not just generic blooms, they were specific, identifiable species: poppies, cornflowers, and daisies, the flowers that had grown wild on the battlefields of France. The village in the distance, she realized with a jolt, bore a striking resemblance to a photograph she had seen of a small town near the Somme, a place Aunt Beatrice had mentioned only once, in a hushed, almost fearful tone. Victoria reached for her aunt's old address book, a worn leather volume she had kept meticulously organized. She flipped through the pages, her finger tracing the names, many of which were followed by a small, black cross, a silent testament to the lives lost in the war. There was no entry for Brooks, Henry. She tried variations H. Brooks, Corporal Brooks, but found nothing. Frustration gnawed at her. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a vast, unknown landscape, with only a single, fragile thread to guide her. She decided to start with what she knew: the Somme. She went to her bookshelf and pulled down a heavy volume, a detailed history of the First World War. She turned to the section on the Battle of the Somme, her heart pounding in her chest. The descriptions were harrowing, a brutal account of trench warfare, of endless mud, of unimaginable loss. Victoria read about the devastating artillery barrages, the waves of soldiers sent over the top to face almost certain death, the horrific conditions in the field hospitals. She imagined her aunt, a young woman then, working tirelessly amidst the carnage, tending to the wounded and dying. She found a map of the Somme region, pinpointing the location of the village depicted in the tapestry. It was close to several major battlefields, places with names that sent shivers down her spine: Thiepval, Beaumont Hamel, La Boisselle. She wondered if Corporal Henry Brooks had fought in those battles, if he had witnessed the horrors described in the book. As she read, a name caught her eye: Captain Alistair Finch. He was mentioned several times in the accounts of the Somme, a decorated officer known for his bravery and his compassion for his men. A strange intuition, a feeling she couldn't explain, told her that this Captain Finch might hold a clue to the mystery of Corporal Brooks. Victoria closed the book, her mind reeling. The war, which had seemed so distant, so abstract, suddenly felt intensely personal. It was no longer just a historical event, it was a living, breathing entity that had touched the lives of everyone she knew, including her aunt, and a man she had never met, but whose name was now woven into the fabric of her own life. She looked at the tapestry again, the faded figures of the soldiers seeming to watch her, their silent plea echoing across the years. She felt a growing determination to uncover their story, to give voice to their forgotten sacrifice. The echoes of the Somme, once faint and distant, were now resonating within her, calling her to embark on a journey of discovery, a journey that promised to be both heartbreaking and profoundly transformative. She would start with the name she saw connected to the Somme: Captain Alistair Finch. She hoped he was still alive. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Attic Dust. The following morning, Victoria found herself back in the attic storeroom, drawn by an irresistible pull. The tapestry, now resting safely in her library, felt like a silent companion, its presence a constant reminder of the mystery she was determined to solve. She had spent a restless night, her dreams filled with images of battlefields and faded faces, the name Corporal Henry Brooks echoing in the darkness. She had decided to search the attic again, this time with a more specific focus. If the tapestry held a clue, perhaps there were other items, hidden amongst the clutter, that could shed light on her aunt's connection to Corporal Brooks. She started with the crates closest to where she had found the tapestry, carefully lifting out each item, examining it closely. She found old photographs, their images faded and cracked, depicting scenes of life before the war. Picnics, garden parties, young women in elegant dresses. None of the faces were familiar. None of them matched the name that haunted her. She found stacks of letters, tied together with faded ribbons, mostly correspondence between her aunt and her parents, filled with mundane details of daily life. Then, tucked away in a small, wooden box, she found a collection of postcards. They were all addressed to her aunt, and they were all from France. Victoria's heart quickened as she began to read them. Most were from fellow nurses, describing their experiences in the field hospitals, the challenges they faced, the small moments of joy they found amidst the suffering. But one postcard stood out. It was a simple, unassuming card depicting a field of poppies. The handwriting on the back was different, more masculine, less practiced. It was signed simply, H. The message was brief, almost cryptic. Thinking of you. The flowers still bloom, even here. Hope to see you soon. Victoria turned the postcard over and over in her hands, her mind racing. Could this H be Henry Brooks? The mention of flowers seemed to connect to the tapestry, to the wildflowers woven into its design. The phrase even here suggested a place of hardship, a place like the battlefields of the Somme. She continued her search, her excitement growing. She found a small, leather-bound diary, its pages filled with her aunt's elegant script. She eagerly began to read, hoping to find a mention of Corporal Brooks, of the mysterious H. But the diary entries were mostly focused on her aunt's work at the hospital, her observations of the patients, her reflections on the war. There were no names, no personal details, only a sense of growing weariness, of a spirit slowly being crushed by the weight of the suffering she witnessed. Victoria felt a pang of sadness for her aunt, for the young woman who had faced such horrors with such quiet courage. As she reached the end of the diary, she found a single, pressed flower tucked between the last 2 pages. It was a poppy, its petals faded and brittle, but still retaining a hint of its vibrant red color. Victoria carefully removed the flower, her fingers trembling. It was a tangible link to the postcard, to the mysterious H, to the tapestry. She closed the diary, feeling a sense of both frustration and hope. She hadn't found the explicit confirmation she was looking for, but she had found whispers, hints, fragments of a story waiting to be pieced together. The attic dust, once a symbol of forgotten memories, now seemed to hold the promise of revelation, of a past that was slowly, tantalizingly, beginning to emerge from the shadows. The poppy was more than a memento, it was a path forward. Chapter 4. A Portrait of the Past. Victoria decided to take a different approach. The attic, while yielding some clues, felt like a labyrinth of fragmented memories. She needed something more concrete, something that could provide a visual connection to the elusive Corporal Henry Brooks. She remembered her aunt mentioning a local portrait painter, a Mr. Silas Blackwood, who had been quite renowned in Arlington before the war. He had painted several portraits of prominent families in the area, including, Victoria vaguely recalled, a portrait of her Aunt Beatrice. She located Mr. Blackwood's address in an old directory. He still lived in the same, slightly dilapidated Victorian house on the outskirts of town. Victoria phoned, a surprisingly modern convenience her aunt had eventually embraced, and made an appointment to see him the following afternoon. Mr. Blackwood was an elderly gentleman, his hands gnarled with age, his eyes still sharp and observant behind thick spectacles. His studio was a cluttered space, filled with easels, canvases, and the lingering scent of oil paint. He greeted Victoria with a polite, if somewhat distant, courtesy. "Miss Ellis," he said, his voice raspy with age, "it's been many years. I believe the last time I saw you, you were a young girl, accompanying your aunt." "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," Victoria replied, "I remember. You painted a portrait of my aunt, Beatrice, many years ago. Before the war." Mr. Blackwood's eyes twinkled. "Ah, yes, Miss Beatrice. A beautiful woman, with a spirit as bright as a summer day. A sad loss, her passing. I'm trying to learn more about her life," Victoria said, "particularly her time during the war. She served as a nurse in France." Mr. Blackwood nodded. "Yes, I recall. She wrote to me occasionally. Brave woman. I was wondering, Victoria continued, if you might have any photographs, any sketches from that time. Anything that might show me what she looked like, who she knew. Mr. Blackwood hesitated, his gaze drifting towards a stack of old portfolios leaning against a wall. I have some materials, he said slowly, but they are quite old, quite disorganized. I haven't looked at them in years. He led Victoria to the portfolios and began to carefully sift through them. He pulled out sketches of soldiers, portraits of nurses, landscapes of war-torn villages. Victoria watched with bated breath, her heart pounding with anticipation. Finally, Mr. Blackwood stopped, his hand hovering over a particular sketch. He carefully pulled it out and handed it to Victoria. It was a charcoal drawing of a young woman, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and sadness. It was unmistakably Aunt Beatrice, but younger, more vulnerable. And next to her, in the same sketch, stood a young man in a soldier's uniform. He was tall and lean, with a kind face and a gentle smile. He was looking at Beatrice with an expression of undisguised affection. Beneath the sketch, in Mr. Blackwood's elegant script, were two names, Beatrice and Henry. Victoria felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of joy and sorrow. She finally had a face to put with the name, a visual confirmation of the connection between her aunt and Corporal Henry Brooks. She looked at the sketch, at the young couple, their faces frozen in time, their love story waiting to be told. The gentle smile, the way he looked at her, was undeniable. This was him. This is him, Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. This is Corporal Henry Brooks. Mr. Blackwood nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Yes, he said softly. A fine young man. He was very fond of your aunt. He paused and glanced away. Very fond, indeed. Chapter 5. Letters from a Stranger. Armed with the sketch of Henry and Beatrice, Victoria felt a renewed sense of purpose. The image fueled her determination, giving a tangible form to the mystery that had consumed her. Mr. Blackwood, stirred by Victoria's quest and his own rekindled memories, had offered to search his storage for any correspondence from Beatrice during the war. He promised to contact her if he found anything of significance. Victoria returned home, the sketch carefully tucked away in her bag. She spread the tapestry out on the table again, studying it alongside the drawing. The resemblance between the young man in the sketch and the faintly woven figures in the tapestry was undeniable. It was as if the tapestry was a ghostly echo of the sketch, a visual representation of a love story tragically cut short. She decided to write to the War Office, requesting any information they might have on Corporal Henry Brooks, service number unknown. She knew it was a long shot, that the records might be incomplete or inaccessible, but she had to try. The waiting, she knew, would be agonizing. Days turned into a week, and Victoria found herself increasingly restless. She tended her garden, she read, she tried to focus on the mundane tasks of daily life, but her mind kept returning to the tapestry, to the sketch, to the unanswered questions. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. It wasn't from the War Office, but from an address in a small village in England, a place she had never heard of. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, shaky and uneven. Victoria's heart quickened as she tore open the envelope. The letter was from a woman named Eliza Brooks, who identified herself as Henry Brooks's sister. She had received Victoria's address from Mr. Blackwood, who, it turned out, had maintained contact with the Brooks family over the years. Eliza wrote that she had heard of Victoria's interest in her brother and that she had something she wanted to share. Victoria read the letter with trembling hands. Eliza explained that Henry had been deeply in love with a nurse he had met in France, a woman named Beatrice. She had kept all of his letters, letters that he had written to her during the war, letters that spoke of his love for Beatrice, of his hopes and dreams for the future. Eliza wrote that she had been hesitant to share the letters, that they were deeply personal, but that she felt it was important for Victoria to know the truth about her brother's life, about his love for her aunt. She offered to send the letters to Victoria if she wished to read them. Victoria felt a wave of emotion wash over her, gratitude, anticipation, and a profound sense of sadness. She wrote back to Eliza immediately, expressing her heartfelt thanks and her eagerness to read Henry's letters. She knew that the letters would be painful, that they would open up old wounds, but she also knew that they held the key to understanding the story of Henry and Beatrice, a story that had been hidden for too long. She waited, with a mixture of dread and excitement, for the package to arrive from England. The letters, she knew, would be a bridge across time, a connection to a past that had shaped her aunt's life, and now, her own. A connection that promised to reveal the full depth of a love born amidst the chaos and heartbreak of war. The wait was both excruciating and necessary. Chapter 6. The Sergeant's Tale. The package from Eliza Brooks arrived on a blustery autumn day, the wind rattling the windows of Victoria's home. It was a small, unassuming box, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Victoria handled it with reverence, her heart pounding in her chest. She carried it to her library, placed it on the table next to the tapestry, and carefully cut the twine. Inside, nestled amongst layers of tissue paper, were dozens of letters, their envelopes yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting on the envelopes was the same as the one on the postcard Victoria had found in the attic, the simple, unadorned H. She picked up one of the letters, her fingers trembling, and began to read. The letters were a revelation. They were filled with Henry's observations of the war, his descriptions of the horrors he had witnessed, his growing disillusionment with the conflict. But they were also filled with his love for Beatrice, his unwavering devotion to her, his hopes for a future together. He wrote about their first meeting, a chance encounter at a field hospital near the front lines. He described her kindness, her compassion, her strength in the face of unimaginable suffering. He wrote about their stolen moments together, their whispered conversations in the darkness, their shared dreams of a life beyond the war. As Victoria read through the letters, she began to piece together a more complete picture of Henry Brooks. He was a young man from a small farming village, a man who had enlisted with a sense of duty and patriotism, but who had quickly become disillusioned by the brutal realities of war. He was a sensitive soul, a poet at heart, who found solace in his love for Beatrice. One letter, in particular, caught Victoria's attention. It was dated a few weeks before the Battle of the Somme. Henry wrote about a growing sense of foreboding, a premonition that he might not survive the upcoming battle. He wrote about his love for Beatrice, his regret that they might never have the chance to build a life together. He ended the letter with a plea to his sister, Eliza, asking her to take care of Beatrice if anything should happen to him. Victoria felt a lump in her throat, tears welling up in her eyes. She could almost feel Henry's fear, his desperation, his unwavering love for her aunt. She continued reading, her heart aching with each passing letter. The letters stopped abruptly. There were no more letters from Henry after the Battle of the Somme. Victoria knew, with a sinking heart, what that meant. She received a reply from the War Office. It confirmed her worst fears. Corporal Henry Brooks was killed in action on July 1, 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme. His body was never recovered. A knock at the door interrupted her grief. It was a deliverman with a small package. Inside a carefully padded box that had also come from overseas was a tarnished silver locket. Attached was a note, also from Eliza. This was found among Henry's belongings after he was gone. It contains a picture of your aunt. He always wore it. Victoria opened the locket. Inside was a miniature portrait, a perfect likeness of the young Beatrice from Mr. Blackwood's sketch. Her heart shattered. She clutched the locket and closed the box of letters and sat in complete and utter silence. Chapter 7. Arlington's Hidden Gardens. The weight of Henry's letters and the confirmation of his death settled heavily on Victoria. She found herself unable to return to the tapestry, to the image of the soldiers woven into its fabric. It was too painful, too raw. She spent her days in her garden, seeking solace in the quiet beauty of nature, in the cyclical rhythm of growth and decay. Arlington, with its manicured lawns and stately homes, also held pockets of wild, untamed beauty. Victoria had always found comfort in these hidden gardens, in the overgrown pathways and forgotten corners where nature reigned supreme. She wandered through these spaces, her mind lost in a fog of grief and remembrance. One afternoon, while exploring a secluded garden near her home, she stumbled upon a small, stone bench hidden beneath the branches of a weeping willow. The bench was weathered and worn, covered in moss and lichen. It felt like a place where secrets were whispered, where memories lingered. Victoria sat on the bench, her gaze drifting towards a patch of wildflowers growing nearby. They were the same flowers depicted in the tapestry: poppies, cornflowers, and daisies. A wave of emotion washed over her, a mixture of sadness and a strange sense of peace. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could almost hear Henry's voice, whispering in the breeze. She could imagine him sitting beside her, his hand reaching for hers. She could feel his presence, a faint echo of the love that had been so tragically cut short. As she sat there, lost in her memories, she heard a sound, a faint rustling in the leaves. She opened her eyes and saw an elderly gentleman standing nearby, his gaze fixed on her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gentle and kind. Victoria hesitated, unsure whether to confide in this stranger. But there was something in his eyes, a warmth and understanding, that made her feel safe. I'm just remembering someone," she said softly. "Someone I never knew, but who feels very close." The gentleman nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "This garden, it holds many memories, many ghosts." He introduced himself as Mr. Thomas Ashton. He was a retired historian, a man who had spent his life studying the history of Arlington and the surrounding area. He had known Victoria's aunt, Beatrice, many years ago. Victoria, emboldened by this connection, found herself telling Mr. Ashton about the tapestry, about Henry Brooks, about the letters she had received. She shared her grief, her frustration, her determination to uncover the full story of their love. Mr. Ashton listened patiently, his eyes filled with compassion. When she had finished, he said, "I may be able to help you, Miss Ellis. I knew some of the men who served with Corporal Brooks. There's one in particular, a Sergeant Major Davies, who might still be alive. He lives in a veterans' home not far from here. He was known for having an incredible memory." Victoria's heart leaped with hope. A living witness, someone who had known Henry, who had fought alongside him. It was a chance, a fragile thread of possibility, but it was enough. She thanked Mr. Ashton profusely, her spirits lifted by this unexpected encounter. The hidden gardens of Arlington, once a place of solace, had now become a source of hope, a place where the past and the present intertwined, offering a path forward in her quest. She would seek out Sergeant Major Davies. Chapter 8. The Cryptic Map. Victoria arranged a visit to the veterans' home the very next day. The home, a sprawling, red brick building surrounded by neatly manicured lawns, was a haven for men who had survived the war, but who carried its scars, both visible and hidden. The air hummed with a quiet melancholy, a sense of shared experience, of lives forever altered. She was shown to Sergeant Major Davies's room, a small, Spartan space, its walls adorned with faded photographs and military memorabilia. Davies was a frail, elderly man, his body ravaged by time and the lingering effects of a gas attack he had suffered during the war. His eyes, however, were still sharp and alert, windows to a mind that held a vast repository of memories. Victoria introduced herself, explaining her connection to Beatrice and her quest to learn more about Corporal Henry Brooks. Davies listened intently, his gaze fixed on her face. "Brooks," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "I remember him well. A good lad, a brave soldier. He was different from the others. A poet, a dreamer. He talked about his Beatrice constantly." Victoria felt a surge of emotion, a confirmation of everything she had learned from Henry's letters. "I've read his letters," she said. "I know how much he loved her." Davies nodded slowly. "He was devoted to her. He carried a locket, with her picture inside. He never took it off." He paused, his brow furrowed in thought. There was something else, a map. He drew a map a few days before the battle. He said it was a secret place, a place where he and Beatrice planned to meet after the war. Victoria's heart quickened. A map. A tangible link to Henry's hopes and dreams, a clue to the place that held such significance for him. "Do you know what happened to the map?" she asked, her voice filled with anticipation. Davies hesitated. "I saw him tuck it into his tunic pocket just before we went over the top. I don't know, I doubt it survived. The shelling was relentless. Everything was obliterated." Victoria felt a pang of disappointment. The map, it seemed, was lost forever, another casualty of the war. But Davies wasn't finished. But he continued, his eyes twinkling. "I have a good memory, Miss Ellis. A very good memory. I saw the map. I remember the landmarks. I could draw it for you." Victoria could hardly believe her ears. A chance, a slim chance, but a chance nonetheless, to find the place that Henry had held so dear, the place that represented his hopes for a future with Beatrice. Davies, with trembling hands, began to sketch on a piece of paper Victoria provided. He drew a rough outline of the landscape, marking the location of a village, a river, a distinctive hill. He added details, small but significant. A cluster of trees, a ruined farmhouse, a winding path. As he drew, he talked, his memories flowing freely. He described the terrain, the sounds and smells of the battlefield, the camaraderie and the fear that had bound the men together. He spoke of Henry's courage, his kindness, his unwavering belief in the power of love. Finally, he finished the sketch. It was a crude map, a far cry from the detailed cartography of the military, but it was enough. It was a guide, a path to the past, a connection to Henry's heart. The map, a symbol of hope amidst the devastation of war, now rested in Victoria's hands, a tangible link to a love story that refused to be forgotten. It felt like destiny. Chapter 9. Shadows of Betrayal. The map, drawn from Sergeant Major Davies's fading memory, became Victoria's obsession. She studied it constantly, comparing it to her own maps of the Somme region, trying to pinpoint the exact location of Henry's secret place. The landmarks Davies had described were vague, blurred by the passage of time and the devastation of the war. She decided she needed to go to France. She needed to walk the ground Henry had walked, to see the landscape with her own eyes, to feel the echoes of the past. The thought was daunting, but she knew it was the only way to truly understand Henry's story, to find a place that held such significance for him and Beatrice. Before she left, she received another letter from Eliza Brooks. This letter was different from the previous ones. It was filled with a sense of unease, of unspoken concern. Eliza wrote that she had been going through some of Henry's old belongings, things she hadn't looked at in years, and she had found something that disturbed her. It was a letter, addressed to Henry, but it wasn't from Beatrice. It was from another woman, a woman named Isabelle Dubois, a name Victoria had never heard before. The letter was dated a few weeks before the Battle of the Somme, and its contents were troubling. Isabelle wrote about a secret rendezvous, a clandestine meeting with Henry. She expressed her anger, her jealousy, her feeling of betrayal. She accused Henry of lying to her, of using her, of breaking his promises. She ended the letter with a threat, a veiled warning that she would reveal their secret if he didn't meet with her again. Victoria read the letter with a growing sense of dread. Who was Isabelle Dubois? And what was her connection to Henry? The letter cast a shadow over the image of Henry she had carefully constructed, the image of a man devoted solely to Beatrice. She felt a pang of doubt, a flicker of uncertainty. Had Henry been unfaithful to Beatrice? Had he lied to her? The thought was almost unbearable, a betrayal of the love story she had come to cherish. She wrote back to Eliza, expressing her confusion and her concern. She asked Eliza if she knew anything about Isabelle Dubois, about her relationship with Henry. She waited anxiously for a reply, her mind filled with questions and doubts. The trip to France, which had once seemed like a pilgrimage, now felt fraught with uncertainty. The map, once a symbol of hope, now seemed to lead her into a darker, more complex narrative, a story of secrets and betrayal, a story that threatened to shatter the image of the man she had come to admire and respect. The shadows of the past, it seemed, were deeper and more treacherous than she had ever imagined. She had to know the truth, no matter how painful. Chapter 10. A Dance with Remembrance. Victoria arrived in France on a crisp autumn morning, the air carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The landscape, even 3 years after the war's end, bore the scars of battle. Fields that had once been vibrant with life were now scarred with trenches, pockmarked with shell craters, a silent testament to the devastation that had unfolded. She traveled to the Somme region, her heart heavy with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She had booked a room in a small village near the area depicted on Sergeant Major Davies's map, a village that had been almost completely destroyed during the war, but was now slowly being rebuilt. The village was a somber place, its inhabitants still reeling from the loss and trauma of the war. Victoria felt a profound sense of sadness, a connection to the suffering that had permeated this land. She found the local church, partially rebuilt, and entered its quiet sanctuary. The stained glass windows, shattered during the war, had been replaced with plain glass, but the sunlight still filtered through, casting a soft, ethereal glow on the stone walls. Victoria sat in one of the pews, her gaze drifting towards the altar. She imagined Beatrice, working tirelessly in a nearby field hospital, tending to the wounded and dying. She imagined Henry, writing letters to Beatrice in the darkness of his trench, his words filled with love and longing. She imagined their stolen moments together, their whispered conversations, their shared dreams of a future that would never be. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she heard music, a faint, melancholic melody played on a piano. She followed the sound to a small room at the back of the church, where she found an elderly woman playing a simple, haunting tune. The woman, sensing Victoria's presence, stopped playing and turned to her. "Bonjour, madam," she said, her voice gentle and welcoming. Victoria, hesitant at first, found herself drawn to the woman's warmth and kindness. She introduced herself, explaining her reason for being in France, her quest to learn more about Henry Brooks and Beatrice. The woman, whose name was Madame Dubois, listened intently, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. When Victoria had finished, Madame Dubois said, "Corporal Brooks, I remember him. He was a friend of my daughter, Isabelle." Victoria's heart skipped a beat. Isabelle Dubois. The name from the letter, the woman who had threatened to reveal a secret. She felt a surge of apprehension, a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Your daughter," Victoria began, her voice trembling. "She wrote a letter to Henry, just before the battle. A letter that suggested a different kind of relationship." Madame Dubois nodded slowly, her gaze drifting towards the piano. "Isabelle, she was young, impulsive. She fell in love with Corporal Brooks. But he did not return her feelings. He loved another, a nurse." Victoria felt a wave of relief, a confirmation of what she had always believed. But there was still a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that there was more to the story. The letter, Victoria said, it spoke of a secret, a threat. Madame Dubois sighed. "Isabelle, she was desperate. She threatened to tell the authorities about Henry's pacifist leanings. He had confided in her, shared his doubts about the war. It was a dangerous thing to do in those times." Victoria understood. Henry's disillusionment with the war, his poetic soul, his secret yearning for peace. It was a side of him that he had hidden from everyone except, it seemed, Isabelle. A secret that could have had dire consequences. "Isabelle never told," Madame Dubois said softly, a tear rolling down her cheek. She regretted her threat, almost immediately. She was heartbroken when she learned of his death. The music, the shared grief, the confession, it was a dance with remembrance, a poignant moment of connection and understanding, a revelation that shed light on the shadows of betrayal, revealing the complexities of love and loss in a time of war. The secret was not of infidelity, but of conscience. Chapter 11. The Wounded Healer. The revelation about Henry's pacifist leanings, shared with Isabelle Dubois in a moment of vulnerability, added another layer to Victoria's understanding of the man. It explained his sensitivity, his poetic soul, his growing disillusionment with the war, all evident in his letters to Beatrice. It also explained the threat Isabel had made, a threat born of desperation and unrequited love. Victoria spent the next few days exploring the area depicted on Sergeant Major Davies's map. The landscape, though scarred by war, still retained a haunting beauty. She followed the winding paths, crossed the small river, climbed the distinctive hill, all landmarks described by Davies. She found the cluster of trees, the ruined farmhouse, all eerily familiar, as if she were walking through a dream. She felt a growing sense of connection to Henry, to the place that had held such significance for him. She could almost feel his presence, a faint echo of his spirit lingering in the air. She imagined him walking these same paths, his hand reaching for Beatrice's, their love a beacon of hope amidst the surrounding devastation. One afternoon, while exploring a wooded area near the ruined farmhouse, she stumbled upon a small, hidden clearing. In the center of the clearing was a single, ancient oak tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. Beneath the tree, almost hidden amongst the undergrowth, was a small, stone marker. Victoria knelt down, her heart pounding in her chest. She carefully brushed away the leaves and moss, revealing an inscription carved into the stone. It was barely legible, faded by time and the elements, but she could make out the words, HB. B. Forever. She felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of joy and sorrow. She had found it. Henry's secret place, the place where he and Beatrice had planned to meet after the war, the place that represented their hopes and dreams. As she sat there, gazing at the inscription, she heard a sound, a faint rustling in the leaves. She looked up and saw a figure emerging from the woods, a man, tall and lean, his face obscured by the shadows. Victoria felt a moment of fear, a sense of vulnerability in this isolated place. But as the man drew closer, she saw that he was not a threat. He was dressed in simple, worn clothing, his face weathered and lined, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the stone marker. "You know about this place?" he asked, his voice hesitant, his accent distinctly French. Victoria nodded slowly. "I'm looking for information about the man who carved this inscription," she said. "Corporal Henry Brooks." The man's eyes widened slightly. "Corporal Brooks," he repeated, his voice filled with a mixture of surprise and recognition. I knew him. I was a medic during the war. I treated him after he was wounded." Victoria's heart leaped with hope. Another witness, another connection to Henry's past. He survived the battle?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man hesitated. "He survived the initial assault," he said slowly. "But he was badly injured. Shell shock, they called it. He lost his memory. He didn't know who he was, where he came from." Victoria felt a wave of dizziness, her mind reeling. Henry alive, but lost, his memory erased by the trauma of war. It was a twist she had never anticipated, a revelation that shattered her understanding of his fate. The wounded healer, a man who had tended to others, now himself a victim of the war's invisible wounds. A man robbed of his past, of his love, of his very identity. She felt a new wave of compassion wash over her. Chapter 12. Beneath the Weeping Willow. The French medic, whose name was Jean-Luc, explained that after the war, Henry, still suffering from amnesia, had been taken to a small village in the south of France, a place far removed from the battlefields of the Somme. He had been given a new name, Pierre Dubois, and had slowly begun to rebuild his life, working as a gardener at a local monastery. Jean-Luc had lost touch with Henry Pierre years ago, but he believed he was still living in the same village. He offered to accompany Victoria there to help her find him. The journey south was a long one, filled with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Victoria's mind raced with possibilities. What would Henry be like? Would he remember anything of his past? Would he recognize her, or at least recognize the name Beatrice? They arrived in the village, a picturesque place nestled amongst rolling hills and vineyards, late in the afternoon. The monastery, a sprawling, stone building surrounded by lush gardens, was a haven of peace and tranquility. Victoria felt a sense of calm, a feeling that she was drawing closer to the truth, to the final chapter of Henry's story. Jean-Luc spoke to one of the monks, explaining their reason for being there. The monk listened intently, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He confirmed that a man named Pierre Dubois did indeed work in the gardens, and he offered to take them to him. They followed the monk through the cloisters, their footsteps echoing on the stone floors. They reached the gardens, a vast expanse of flowers, vegetables, and fruit trees, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. The monk pointed towards a figure working in the distance, a man tending to a row of rose bushes. "That is Pierre," he said softly. Victoria's heart pounded in her chest as she walked towards the figure. He was tall and lean, his hair now streaked with gray, his face weathered and lined, but she recognized him immediately. It was Henry, the man from the sketch, the man from the tapestry, the man from her dreams. He looked up as she approached, his eyes, a startling shade of blue, filled with a mixture of surprise and confusion. He didn't recognize her, of course, but there was something in his gaze, a flicker of something, that made her heart ache. "Pierre," Jean-Luc said, his voice gentle, "this is Miss Ellis. She has come a long way to see you." Henry Pierre looked at Victoria, his brow furrowed in concentration. I don't understand," he said, his voice hesitant, his English heavily accented. "Do I know you?" Victoria hesitated, unsure how to begin. "I know about your past," she said softly. "I know about Corporal Henry Brooks." The name seemed to trigger something in him. He flinched slightly, his hand reaching up to touch his forehead, as if trying to grasp a fleeting memory. "Henry Brooks," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "The name, it feels familiar." Victoria took a deep breath. "You were a soldier," she said. "You fought in the war. You were in love with a woman named Beatrice." Tears welled up in his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound book. It was a book of poetry, filled with his own handwritten verses. On the first page, in faded ink, was an inscription, "To Beatrice, my love, my life, my everything." "Henry." He looked at Victoria, his eyes filled with a profound sadness, a longing for a past he couldn't quite grasp. He pointed to a weeping willow on the grounds, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. I often sit there. Memories. Fragments. They come to me sometimes." He looked up at her, a glimmer of understanding beginning to dawn. Beatrice. Chapter 13. The Spy's Confession. Victoria spent the next few days with Henry Pierre at the monastery, slowly, patiently, piecing together the fragments of his shattered memory. The book of poetry, the inscription to Beatrice, had been a breakthrough, a trigger that had unlocked a flood of emotions, if not concrete memories. Jean-Luc, with his medical background, explained that Henry's amnesia was likely a result of severe trauma, a defense mechanism his mind had created to protect him from the horrors he had witnessed. He cautioned Victoria that a full recovery of his memory was unlikely, but that with time and patience, some fragments might return. They spent hours walking in the gardens, talking about Beatrice, about Henry's life before the war, about his love of poetry, about his hopes and dreams. Victoria showed him the sketch, the letters, the locket with Beatrice's picture. She told him about the tapestry, about the wildflowers woven into its design, about the hidden message of love and loss. Henry listened intently, his eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and sadness. He recognized the woman in the locket. He felt a connection to the words in the letters. He was drawn to the beauty of the tapestry. But the memories remained elusive, fragmented, like pieces of a shattered mirror. One evening, as they sat beneath the weeping willow, the place where Henry said he often experienced fleeting memories, a visitor arrived at the monastery. It was an elderly woman, frail and elegant, her face etched with a lifetime of experience. She introduced herself as Madame Sophie Moreau, a former acquaintance of Madame Dubois and, surprisingly, of Aunt Beatrice. Madame Moreau explained that she had heard of Victoria's quest, of her search for Henry Brooks. She had come to share a secret, a piece of information that she had kept hidden for many years. During the war, she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, I worked for the French resistance. I was a courier, carrying messages, gathering intelligence. Victoria listened, intrigued. This was a new, unexpected element to the story. Beatrice, Madame Moreau continued, she was also involved. She used her position as a nurse to gather information, to pass messages to me. She was very brave, very resourceful. Victoria was stunned. Her aunt, a spy? It was a revelation that added another layer of complexity to Beatrice's life, a secret she had carried with her to her grave. And Henry, Madame Moreau said, her gaze fixed on Henry, who was listening intently. He knew about Beatrice's activities. He helped her on occasion. He used his knowledge of the terrain, his contacts with the local population, to gather information. This explained Henry's pacifist leanings, his secret conversations with Isabelle Dubois. He wasn't just a disillusioned soldier, he was actively working against the war, helping Beatrice in her clandestine activities. There was an incident. Madame Moreau continued, her voice trembling slightly. A message that went astray. A betrayal. Someone informed on us. The Germans, they were waiting for us. She paused, her eyes filled with tears. Beatrice, she was almost captured. She escaped, but she was deeply shaken. She blamed herself. She believed that someone close to her had betrayed her. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. The shadows of betrayal, which had surfaced with Isabelle Dubois's letter, now deepened, encompassing Beatrice as well. The war, it seemed, had not only taken lives, it had also shattered trust, destroyed relationships, left a legacy of suspicion and guilt. I never knew who the traitor was, Madame Moreau said softly. But I always suspected it was someone close to Beatrice. Someone she trusted. She looked directly at Henry, a question in her eyes. A question that hung heavy in the air, unanswered, a final, lingering shadow over the story of love and loss. The confession added another layer, but not an answer. Chapter 14. A promise across the ocean. The revelation of Beatrice's involvement in the French resistance and the lingering suspicion of betrayal cast a new light on the story. Victoria realized that the tapestry, with its hidden figures of soldiers and its cryptic inscription, was not just a representation of love and loss, it was also a testament to courage, to sacrifice, to the hidden battles fought in the shadows of war. She continued to spend time with Henry, helping him to connect with his fragmented memories. He began to recall small details, the smell of gunpowder, the sound of artillery fire, the faces of his fellow soldiers. He remembered Beatrice's touch, her voice, her smile, but the full context of their relationship remained elusive. One afternoon, while they were walking in the monastery gardens, Henry stopped suddenly, his gaze fixed on a patch of wildflowers growing near a small stream. They were the same flowers depicted in the tapestry, poppies, cornflowers, and daisies. Beatrice, he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. She loved these flowers. We used to pick them together. He knelt down, his fingers gently touching the petals of a poppy. A memory, vivid and clear, flashed through his mind. He saw himself and Beatrice, standing in a field of wildflowers, their hands intertwined, their eyes filled with love. He heard her laughter, her voice, her whispered promise of a future together. He looked at Victoria, his eyes filled with tears. I remember, he said, his voice trembling. I remember her. I remember everything. The breakthrough was profound, a moment of catharsis, a release of years of pent-up emotion. Henry's memory, though still fragile, had returned, bringing with it the full weight of his love for Beatrice and the pain of his loss. Victoria felt a surge of relief, of gratitude, of profound sadness. She had helped Henry to reclaim his past, to reconnect with the love that had defined his life. But she also knew that the recovery of his memory had brought with it a renewed sense of grief, a reopening of old wounds. As the days passed, Henry's memories became stronger, more vivid. He remembered the battle, the shelling, the chaos, the moment he was wounded. He remembered the fear, the pain, the feeling of losing consciousness. He remembered waking up in a hospital, his mind a blank slate, his past erased. He also remembered the betrayal, the suspicion that had lingered in the aftermath of the failed mission. He didn't know who the traitor was, but he remembered the feeling of distrust, the sense that someone close to them had been responsible. Victoria decided it was time to return to Arlington. She had fulfilled her promise to Eliza Brooks to uncover the truth about Henry's life, about his love for Beatrice. She had found Henry, helped him to reclaim his past, and brought a measure of closure to a story that had been hidden for too long. Before she left, she and Henry stood together beneath the weeping willow, the place where his memories had first begun to return. They made a promise to each other, a promise to keep the memory of Beatrice alive, to honor her courage, her sacrifice, her unwavering love. Victoria returned to Arlington, carrying with her the weight of the past, the burden of secrets, the enduring power of love. She knew that the story of Henry and Beatrice was not just a personal tragedy, it was a reflection of the larger tragedy of war, a testament to the countless lives that had been shattered, the countless loves that had been lost. The promise, a silent vow across the ocean, was all that remained. A bond forged in shared grief and enduring remembrance. Chapter 15. The Shell-Shocked Soldier. Back in Arlington, Victoria felt a profound shift within her. The journey to France, the discovery of Henry, the unraveling of the past had changed her. She was no longer the quiet, reserved woman who had spent her days tending her garden and managing her aunt's estate. She had become a custodian of memories, a keeper of secrets, a witness to the enduring power of love and loss. She placed the tapestry in a prominent position in her library, a constant reminder of the story it represented. She often sat and gazed at it, her mind drifting back to France, to the monastery gardens, to the weeping willow where Henry had reclaimed his past. She received regular letters from Henry. His memory continued to improve, though there were still gaps, moments of confusion. He wrote about his life at the monastery, his work in the gardens, his growing sense of peace. He also wrote about Beatrice, about his memories of their time together, about his enduring love for her. Victoria, in turn, wrote to Henry, sharing her own reflections on the past, her thoughts on the tapestry, her insights into Beatrice's life. They had formed a bond, a connection forged in shared grief and mutual understanding. One day, Victoria received a visit from an unexpected guest. It was a man named Arthur Davies, the son of Sergeant Major Davies, the veteran who had drawn the map that had led Victoria to Henry. Arthur explained that his father had passed away peacefully in his sleep a few weeks earlier. He had come to deliver a package to Victoria, a small wooden box that his father had instructed him to give to her after his death. He said it contained something important, Arthur explained, something related to Corporal Brooks. Victoria opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, nestled amongst layers of cotton wool, was a small, tarnished metal object. It was a bullet, a spent cartridge, its surface etched with a single, barely legible initial. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. The bullet, the initial, it was a connection to Isabelle Dubois, to the threat she had made, to the lingering suspicion of betrayal. Arthur explained that his father had found the bullet amongst Henry's belongings after the battle. He had kept it all these years, believing it might hold a clue to the identity of the traitor. "My father always felt guilty," Arthur said, that he hadn't been able to protect Corporal Brooks. He believed that someone had deliberately led him into danger. Victoria understood. Sergeant Major Davies, haunted by the memory of his fallen comrade, had carried the burden of suspicion for years, seeking justice, seeking closure. The bullet, a symbol of violence and betrayal, now rested in Victoria's hands. It was a tangible link to the darker side of the story, to the hidden conflicts, the secret enmities that had played out in the shadows of war. It was a reminder that the truth, like the tapestry, was often woven with threads of both light and darkness, of love and betrayal, of hope and despair. The Shell-Shocked Soldier, Henry, had carried more than just the trauma of war. He had carried the weight of a secret, a betrayal, that had haunted him even in his amnesia. She now knew the who, but not the why. Chapter 16. Scars of the Heart. The bullet, with its etched initial I, became a focal point for Victoria's renewed investigation. She knew Isabelle Dubois had been in love with Henry, had threatened him, but the idea of her deliberately betraying him, leading him to his supposed death, seemed almost incomprehensible. She needed to understand Isabelle's motivations, to delve deeper into the complexities of her relationship with Henry and Beatrice. She decided to write to Madame Moreau, the former resistance member who had revealed Beatrice's secret activities. She asked Madame Moreau if she knew anything more about Isabelle, about her personality, about her involvement in the events leading up to the Battle of the Somme. The reply from Madame Moreau was slow in coming, but when it arrived, it contained a wealth of information, a glimpse into the life of a woman caught in the crosscurrents of love, jealousy, and war. Madame Moreau wrote that Isabelle had been a young woman of strong passions, impulsive and headstrong. She had been deeply in love with Henry, but her love had been unrequited. She had resented Beatrice, seeing her as a rival, an obstacle to her happiness. Isabelle was not a bad person, Madame Moreau wrote, but she was vulnerable, easily manipulated. She was also connected. Her brother, Jean-Paul, was a known collaborator, a man who worked with the Germans, providing them with information. Victoria felt a jolt of understanding. Jean-Paul Dubois, the collaborator. The connection was clear, the motive almost undeniable. Isabelle, desperate to win Henry's love, or perhaps driven by a desire for revenge, had used her brother's connections to betray Henry, to lead him into a trap. But Madame Moreau's letter contained another, even more shocking revelation. After the war, she wrote Isabelle she confessed. She admitted to having given information to her brother, information that led to the ambush. She claimed she hadn't intended for Henry to be killed, that she had only wanted to scare him, to make him realize his love for her. Isabelle's confession, however, had come too late. Henry was presumed dead, his memory lost, his life irrevocably altered. Isabelle had lived with the guilt of her actions for years, haunted by the consequences of her desperate act. Victoria felt a wave of conflicting emotions, anger, pity, sadness. Isabelle's actions had been reprehensible, driven by jealousy and a misguided sense of love. But she had also suffered, carrying the burden of her guilt, living with the knowledge that she had destroyed the life of the man she loved. The scars of the heart, Victoria realized, were often deeper, more enduring, than the physical wounds of war. They were scars that marked not only the victims, but also the perpetrators, leaving a legacy of pain, regret, and remorse. Isabelle's actions, born of a desperate, unrequited love, had left an indelible mark on the lives of everyone involved, a testament to the destructive power of jealousy and the enduring consequences of betrayal. The why was now clear. A twisted, tragic act of desperation. Chapter 17. The Lost Battalion. Victoria, armed with the knowledge of Isabelle Dubois's confession and her brother's collaboration, felt a renewed sense of urgency to share this information with Henry. She wrote to him immediately, detailing Madame Moreau's revelations, explaining the circumstances surrounding the betrayal that had led to his presumed death and subsequent amnesia. She knew the information would be painful for Henry, that it would reopen old wounds, but she also believed it was necessary for his healing, for his complete understanding of the past. Henry's reply was delayed, and when it finally arrived, it was shorter than usual, his handwriting shaky and uneven. He wrote that the news had been devastating, that it had brought back a flood of painful memories, not just of the battle, but of Isabelle, of their brief, ill-fated connection. He remembered her now, her beauty, her intensity, her desperate pleas for his love. He remembered his own feelings of confusion, his attempts to distance himself from her, his unwavering devotion to Beatrice. He also remembered the feeling of betrayal, the sense that someone close to him had been responsible for the ambush, but he had never suspected Isabelle. I pitied her, he wrote. Even then, I knew she was troubled, unhappy. But I never imagined she was capable of such treachery. He wrote that he needed time to process the information, to come to terms with the full extent of the betrayal. He also wrote that he was planning a trip, a journey back to the Somme, to the place where he had lost his memory, to the place where he had almost lost his life. Victoria understood. Henry needed to confront his past, to face the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. He needed to walk the ground where he had fought, to visit the graves of his fallen comrades, to find a measure of peace, a sense of closure. She decided to join him. She felt a responsibility to be there for him, to support him in his journey of remembrance, to help him navigate the painful emotions that were sure to surface. They met in France, at the same village where Victoria had first found Jean-Luc, the medic who had treated Henry after the battle. They traveled together to the Somme, to the battlefields that were now quiet, serene, but still bore the scars of war. They visited the memorials, the cemeteries, the endless rows of white crosses that marked the graves of the fallen. They stood together at the site of the ambush, the place where Henry's life had been forever changed. Henry, guided by his rekindled memory, led Victoria to a specific location, a small, overgrown area near the ruined farmhouse, where he had carved the inscription on the stone marker. He explained that this was the place where his battalion had been ambushed, the place where he had been wounded, the place where he had lost his memory. It was chaos, he said, his voice trembling. The shelling, the gunfire, the screams, I saw my friends falling all around me. I felt a searing pain, and then nothing. He knelt down, his fingers tracing the outline of a shell crater, still visible in the earth. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was back there, in the midst of the battle, reliving the horror, the fear, the loss. Victoria placed a hand on his shoulder, offering comfort, support. She knew that this journey was painful, but she also knew that it was necessary, a crucial step in his healing, in his quest to reclaim his past, to find peace with the memories that had haunted him for so long. The Lost Battalion, a group of men swallowed by the war, had left one survivor, scarred but not broken, to remember and to heal. Chapter 18. Threads of Redemption. The visit to the Somme, the revisiting of the battlefield, the painful reliving of the ambush, had a profound effect on Henry. It was as if the physical act of returning to the place where he had lost his memory had unlocked a deeper level of understanding, a more complete acceptance of the past. He began to talk more openly about his experiences, about the trauma he had endured, about the guilt he had carried for surviving when so many of his comrades had perished. He also spoke about Isabel, about his feelings of pity and betrayal, about his struggle to reconcile her actions with the woman he had known. Victoria listened patiently, offering support, understanding, and a shared sense of grief. She had come to realize that the story of Henry and Beatrice was not just a love story, it was a story of survival, of resilience, of the enduring human capacity for hope amidst the darkest of times. One evening, as they sat together in the small village where they were staying, Henry said, I need to confront her. I need to see Isabel. Victoria was surprised. She had assumed that Henry would want to distance himself from Isabel, to put the past behind him. But she understood his need for closure, his desire to understand, perhaps even to forgive. They discovered that Isabel was still alive, living in a small town not far from the Somme. She was an old woman now, frail and withdrawn, living a solitary life, haunted by the memories of her past. They arranged a meeting, a confrontation that promised to be both painful and cathartic. They met Isabel in a small, sparsely furnished room in a local nursing home. She was a shadow of her former self, her beauty faded, her eyes filled with a deep sadness, a lifetime of regret. Henry spoke first, his voice gentle but firm. He told her that he remembered everything, that he knew about her betrayal, about her confession. He asked her simply why. Isabel looked at him, her eyes welling up with tears. I was young, she said, her voice trembling. I was foolish. I was in love with you. I thought if I could just get rid of her, Beatrice, you would love me. She explained that she had never intended for him to be killed, that she had only wanted to scare him, to make him realize his love for her. She had believed that her brother, Jean-Paul, would simply warn the Germans about the planned ambush, that they would capture Henry, not kill him. "I was naive," she said, her voice choked with sobs. "I didn't understand the consequences of my actions. I have lived with the guilt every day since." Henry looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and compassion. "I forgive you," he said softly. "I understand the desperation of unrequited love. I understand the pressures of war. I forgive you." The forgiveness, offered with such grace and sincerity, was a moment of profound redemption, a release of years of pent-up guilt and remorse. Isabel broke down completely, weeping uncontrollably, her body shaking with the force of her emotions. Victoria watched, her heart aching for both of them. The threads of redemption, woven into the fabric of the story, offered a measure of healing, a sense of closure, a testament to the enduring power of forgiveness in the face of unimaginable pain. The confrontation, a necessary act of reconciliation, had brought a measure of peace to two souls scarred by the war and by the complexities of love and betrayal. Chapter 19. The Tapestry's Truth. With the confrontation with Isabel behind them and Henry's forgiveness extended, a sense of peace settled over them. The trip to France, initially fraught with apprehension and the weight of the past, had become a journey of healing, of reconciliation, of closure. Before returning to their respective homes, Victoria and Henry decided to visit Beatrice's grave. She was buried in a small cemetery in Arlington, not far from Victoria's home. They had learned from Madame Moreau that after the war, Aunt Beatrice, still haunted from her narrow escape and suspected betrayal, decided to return to America. They stood together before the simple headstone, its inscription bearing Beatrice's name and dates, a silent testament to a life lived with courage, compassion, and a hidden sorrow. Henry placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, the same flowers depicted in the tapestry, poppies, cornflowers, and daisies. She would have forgiven you, too," Henry said, his voice choked with emotion. "She was the kindest, most compassionate person I have ever known. She understood the complexities of the human heart." Victoria nodded, her eyes filled with tears. She had come to know her aunt, not just as the woman who had raised her, but as a complex, courageous, and ultimately tragic figure, a woman who had loved deeply, who had served bravely, who had carried the burden of secrets and betrayal to her grave. As they stood there, reflecting on the lives that had been intertwined by the war, by love, by loss, Victoria realized the full significance of the tapestry. It was not just a piece of forgotten needlework, it was a testament to a love story that had endured the ravages of war, the pain of separation, the sting of betrayal. The tapestry, with its hidden figures of soldiers, its cryptic inscription, its faded colors, represented the complexities of the past, the interwoven threads of love, loss, courage, sacrifice, and ultimately, redemption. It was a story of survival, of resilience, of the enduring human capacity for hope amidst the darkest of times. Victoria decided to donate the tapestry to a museum, a place where it could be displayed, where its story could be told, where its message of love and loss could be shared with the world. She wanted the tapestry to serve as a reminder of the human cost of war, of the enduring power of love, of the importance of forgiveness, of the need for remembrance. The tapestry's truth, she realized, was not just about Henry and Beatrice, it was about all those who had lived through the war, all those who had loved and lost, all those who had carried the burden of secrets and betrayal, all those who had sought redemption and found a measure of peace in the aftermath of unimaginable pain. The tapestry, a silent witness to the past, would now speak to the future, its message of hope and healing resonating across the generations, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. It was a legacy, a gift, a final act of remembrance. Chapter 20. A Love Forged in Fire. Victoria returned to Arlington, her life irrevocably altered by her journey into the past. She had found Henry, helped him to reclaim his memory, and uncovered the truth about Beatrice's life, about her love for Henry, about her courage and sacrifice during the war. She had also learned a great deal about herself, about her own capacity for empathy, for compassion, for resilience. She had faced the shadows of the past, the complexities of love and betrayal, the enduring pain of loss, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, more deeply connected to the human experience. She continued to correspond with Henry, their letters a testament to their shared journey, their mutual understanding, their enduring bond. Henry, now living a quiet life at the monastery in France, had found a measure of peace, a sense of purpose in his work in the gardens, in his connection to the land, in his memories of Beatrice. Victoria, in turn, found a renewed sense of purpose in her own life. She became involved in local historical societies, sharing her knowledge of the war, telling the story of Henry and Beatrice, ensuring that their legacy would not be forgotten. She often visited Beatrice's grave, placing fresh flowers on the headstone, reflecting on the life of the woman who had shaped her own, the woman who had loved and lost, who had served and sacrificed, who had carried the burden of secrets to her grave. One autumn day, as she stood before the headstone, she noticed a figure standing nearby, a man, tall and lean, his hair now completely gray, his eyes filled with a familiar warmth, a familiar sadness. It was Henry. He had come to Arlington, he explained, to visit Beatrice's grave, to pay his respects, to thank Victoria for all she had done. He had also come, he admitted, to see her, to reconnect with the woman who had helped him to reclaim his past, to find a measure of peace. They walked together through the cemetery, their conversation flowing easily, their shared experiences creating a bond that transcended time and distance. They talked about Beatrice, about the war, about the tapestry, about the enduring power of love and forgiveness. As they reached the gate of the cemetery, Henry stopped and turned to Victoria. I have something to ask you, he said, his voice hesitant, his eyes searching hers. Victoria looked at him, her heart filled with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. She knew what he was going to ask, and she knew her answer. Victoria, he said, his voice trembling slightly, I know I can never replace Beatrice, but I have come to care for you deeply. Would you consider spending your life with me? Victoria smiled, her eyes filled with tears. Yes, Henry, she said softly. Yes, I would. Their love, forged in the fires of remembrance, tempered by the pain of loss, strengthened by the bonds of shared experience, was a testament to the enduring power of the human heart, a testament to the possibility of finding love and happiness even in the aftermath of unimaginable pain. It was a second chance, a new beginning, a love story that had blossomed from the ashes of the past, a love that would endure, a love that would honor the memory of Beatrice, a love that would be a beacon of hope for the future. A new chapter had started. Epilogue. Years passed, and Victoria and Henry built a life together, a life filled with quiet joy, with shared memories, with a deep and abiding love. They lived in Arlington, in Victoria's aunt's old house, the house that had once held the secrets of the past, the house that was now filled with the warmth of their present. They often visited Beatrice's grave, placing fresh flowers on the headstone, remembering the woman who had brought them together, the woman whose love and sacrifice had paved the way for their own happiness. They also maintained contact with Eliza Brooks, Henry's sister, who had been instrumental in connecting them, in sharing Henry's letters, in revealing the truth about his past. Eliza visited them in Arlington, and they, in turn, visited her in England, forging a bond of family, a connection that transcended distance and time. The tapestry, now displayed in a prominent museum, became a symbol of their love story, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a reminder of the human cost of war, a beacon of hope for the future. Visitors from all over the world came to see the tapestry, to learn about Henry and Beatrice, to reflect on the complexities of love and loss, to marvel at the resilience of the human heart. Victoria and Henry often visited the museum, standing before the tapestry, their hands intertwined, their eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. They remembered the past, they honored the sacrifices that had been made, they cherished the love that had blossomed from the ashes of war. One day, as they stood before the tapestry, A young girl approached them, her eyes wide with wonder. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "Is it true that they loved each other even after all that happened?" Victoria smiled, her eyes meeting Henry's. "Yes," she said softly. "It's true. Their love had endured. It was a love forged in fire, a love that transcended time, a love that will never be forgotten." And as they walked away from the tapestry, their hands still intertwined, their hearts filled with a deep and abiding peace, they knew that their own love story, a story born of remembrance, a story of second chances, a story of enduring hope, would also live on, a testament to the power of the human spirit, a beacon of light in a world that had once been shrouded in darkness. The story of Henry and Beatrice had enabled their own, and that was the greatest tribute of all.